All right. Well, it is 6:30 and we have nearly 30 people on the line, and I'd like to be respectful of everybody's time. So with that, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2026 Nature Lecture Series, co-sponsored by the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy and the Bloomfield Parks and Recreation Department. My name is Matthew Mace, and I'm the Assistant Director for the Bloomfield Parks Recreation and Leisure Services Department. A little bit of background on this series. We started doing this during the pandemic because we were all in desperate need of programming. And it's been fairly successful for us for the last 6 years now. So we've continued to do it, and it's allowed us to provide this partnership in just a lot of different information for folks out there. That I'll go over some of the housekeeping rules. If you have a question, go ahead and put that in the Q&A, and we will answer those at the end. I'll try, if we have duplications, I'll kind of condense those so that we don't have that. And other than that, that is about it. So with that, I'd like to introduce Yvonne Espinoza from the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy.
Thank you, everyone, for attending our nature lecture series. Very quickly, the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy's mission is to protect open space and promote public appreciation of the natural environment across the region. The region in this respect is the towns of East Granby, West Hartford, Windsor, Bloomfield, and I believe that is it. The Land Trust's mission includes protecting the Trap Rock Ridge shared by the 4 towns and the Salmon Brook, Farmington River, Park River, and the Connecticut River watersheds. The merger plan, honors restrictions on how previously donated lands can be used and continues projects already underway in each town. The Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy protects 45 properties covering 642 acres, including untouched forest and wetland areas and critical meadow habitats, hiking trails, and great locations to observe birds and other wildlife, as well as active farms, including a community garden and support for local farmers. Today we're introducing Dr. Kirsten Martin, Professor of Biology and Program Director for Environmental Science at the University of St. Joseph. Dr. Kirsten Martin is an environmental scientist whose research work focuses on nymphal dragonfly behavior. She earned her BS in Wildlife Management from the University of New Hampshire and MS in Environmental Education from Southern Oregon University, and her PhD in Environmental Studies from Antioch University in New England. Dr. Martin, take it away.
Dr. Martin, I'm sorry, before you get started, those black boxes, is there any way to minimize those on the side of the screen?
Not any better?
Yeah, it's a little bit better. It's gone now. There's one at the top, but I don't think that one may be okay.
I'll drag it off the screen. All right, well,
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect. Well, first off, I want to thank Yvonne and Matt for inviting me to give this presentation this evening, and thanks to all of you who are joining in. I will try to definitely keep to the time limit. I love dragonflies, so it's always a bit of a challenge because I can talk about dragonflies forever. So hopefully I will not bore anyone that's on this talk. So again, thank you all for inviting me to talk a little bit about my work over the years and some of the projects I'm involved in, and most specifically to really talk about these incredible animals that are often overlooked by people because, they're not necessarily what's considered to be agriculturally important. They're not a pest species, but they're beautiful and they love to eat mosquitoes. If there's nothing else out there, I think that's a good sell for how amazing these animals are. So the title of my talk tonight is called Here There Be Dragons, the Unseen World of the Dragonflies. I'm going to be starting off by talking a little bit about basic dragonfly biology, really focusing specifically on dragonflies in New England, and even more specifically than that, dragonflies in Connecticut and Massachusetts, essentially the Connecticut River corridor, and talking about their unique biology, their unique ecology, where you can find them in the winter, where you can find them in the spring, where you can find them in the summer. So hopefully it'll be of interest to everyone that's on this presentation. So to start off with, I want to talk a little bit about the biology of the dragonfly, in particular the life cycle of dragonflies. So most people, when we think of dragonflies, we're thinking of the adults, the beautiful animals that are flying around early spring through maybe mid fall, depending upon whether we have a warm fall or a cooler fall. But that's what most people think of when they think of a dragonfly, and that's certainly, that is a highly visible, probably the most colorful portion of a dragonfly's life is when they are an adult and when they are flying around. However, it's pretty much the smallest part of their entire life cycle. So if you see this little image on the screen, got this giant triangle on the top, tiny little triangle on the bottom, and the adult stage is down here. Okay, so in New England, in our area, our adult dragonflies live for anywhere from 3 to 5 months, and that is species specific. So if they're an early emerger, so if they're emerging very, very early spring, that will give them that longer lifespan. But we also have species that are a little bit lazier and come out pretty darn late in the season, like end of summer into October. So obviously their adult life stage is much shorter in those species. So it's variable. It's dependent upon external temperatures in the environment as well as water temperatures. So there's a lot of variability in that. If you look at that top part of the image, this really big triangle, that is the vast majority of the lifespan of a dragonfly, and that is what's called the nymphal or the larval stage. So again, in New England, our dragonfly species actually live anywhere between 2 to 5 years. So again, the adult is 3 to 5 months. You're thinking 2 to 5 years, where's the rest of their time spent? Not flying around, not in the air. It's in our waterways. Okay, so anywhere from 2 to 5 years, these immature larval form of dragonflies are alive and well in our rivers, our streams, our ponds, our wetlands, and they're active year-round. Now, some species do go into what's called a diapause, so it's essentially like hibernation, using that term very loosely, where they'll kind of really cool down, not go through any more developmental stages, and hang out in their watery environment. But essentially any waterway that does not freeze solid to the bottom. So as long as there's liquid water in the lowest realm of that river or stream or pond, you probably would be able to drill down, dig up the muck, dig up some of the vegetation at the bottom, and find these nymphal dragonflies in the middle of winter. And the reason for that is our water systems in New England, as long as they're deep enough, actually go through stratification. So there's a different temperature between the topmost layer of the water, the middle layer of the water, and then the water that's down in the benthic or bottom section. Obviously, the topmost layer of the water that's exposed to the air gets a lot colder, and eventually it ices over and essentially encapsulates the other layers of water, and we trap warmer water below. So you have colder water on top, warmer water on the bottom during the winter. And then during spring melt, that upper layer starts to warm up and it sinks, and the bottom layer of water flips up, and we get this kind of flushing of nutrients in the spring, and then it happens again in the fall. But that stratification allows for that nice warmer in air quotes, layer where these, little baby dragonflies are able to survive through our winters. And keep in mind, dragonflies obviously are insects, so they are ectotherms. So they are dependent on getting their thermal energy from their surrounding environments. So they're very much attuned to that. So 2 to 5 years, hang out in the water, and then you'll see in this little diagram, that little tiny pinch point between the two triangles is what's called the emergence or eclosure stage. And this happens each time the nymph is growing and has to come out of the water, come out of its exoskeleton. Okay? These guys have an external skeleton, so when they grow, they can't simply stretch their bodies. They literally have to shed that exoskeleton, and the new next instar is developing inside. So each time they grow, they have to come out of the water. They have to emerge, so they pop out of the back of the skin. You'll often see that little demarcation spot where the next instar is going to come out, and then they crawl back into the river, the stream, the wetland, start munching on mosquito larvae, munching on each other, munching on small, fish. They're not picky. They'll eat just about anything. And then when they need to grow again, they'll come out of the water and go through that emergence stage. So each time they go through that till eventually they're big enough to where they're ready to become an adult. They come out of the water a final time, and then that's where you start seeing the adult body come out of the nymphal skin. So that emergence pinch point is highly variable on how long it takes. And this 20 minutes to 2 hours is actually based on my research. There's not a lot of people that focus on that specific part of a dragonfly's life cycle, and that's actually where I spend almost all my research time is looking at that. And I've had individuals that were very creative, came out of the water, emerged, and they were flying within 20 minutes. And then I had the lazy 2-hour one that I think came out of the water a little early and then took his time kind of coming out of the body. So the cool thing about dragonflies and any other insect that has what's called an incomplete metamorphic cycle is that they don't go through what we typically think of for insect metamorphic. When you think of like a butterfly, it's going from an egg to a caterpillar to a pupae or a chrysalis, and then it comes out as a butterfly. You don't see that in these types of insects that have this incomplete cycle. So they go from these various instars of the nymph, where they're getting progressively bigger, and then they come out as whatever their adult form is going to be. And there's no resting stage in between. So there's no pupae, there's no chrysalis, there's nothing like that. The adult body is literally formed inside the body of this nymph. So all the features that the adult needs are inside of there. Now, keep in mind, for 2 to 5 years, this insect knows nothing about flying. It knows nothing about breathing air directly. Its whole life has been crawling around on the bottommost substrate of a river or stream or a wetland. And when it gets big enough, the adult body forms within. So you'll see these kind of little flaps. Hopefully you can see the pointer on your screen, but these little flaps here are wing paths. You can tell this is kind of a final instar of the larvae. they're totally, they don't really have a purpose for this nymph in the water, but that's where the adult wings are being formed inside. So it's like everything is compact, tucked inside that body. Then they come out, they find a spot they kind of like, and then it's the process of eclosure, where the adult body has to pull itself out. So the next couple of slides are going to show you some different images of some dragonflies going through this eclosure process. But first I want to talk about, why should we care about dragonflies? Besides the fact that I think they're amazing animals, as I've already mentioned, there's a lot of different types of dragonflies. Most people think of maybe one or two, some of the more flashy ones, but we have many, 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 many different species of dragonflies in New England, and many of them are listed on various states, lists of critical concerns or endangered or species of special concern. Some of that is due to really specific habitat requirements that either the adult or the nymph has, but frankly, an awful lot of it is due to insufficient knowledge about what's going on. There just really isn't a lot of people looking at dragonflies, doing surveys to kind of know what's out there and what the populations are really like. And they're very cyclical. I've had years where I personally have seen over 400 come out in a span of an hour on a riverbank on the Connecticut River. Next year, I go to the same riverbank and I see 2. So there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered. There's not enough people kind of looking. So let's take a look at some really beautiful pictures of eclosure. So again, this is the process of the adult coming out of that final instar of the larvae. These ones are basket tail. So the positioning, where the nymph decides to crawl out, how it decides to attach to a substrate is all different depending upon the species. Some of them like to go on aquatic vegetation and hang upside down, like we see here. Others like to crawl up on a riverbank 40 or 50 feet away from their waterway and just, emerge right on the shoreline. They don't crawl up on vegetation. Others seem to take great delight in choosing the branch that is furthest out over the river and crawl up like 80 feet and make it really tough for a researcher to grab them. I think they're laughing at me from trees somewhere. But everyone is a little bit different. But here's the really kind of cool thing. So again, here's the final instar nymph. Here is the adults, and you notice that the adults are kind of pale. They look like old, if you're familiar with like Polaroid pictures, they develop their color after they've emerged. So you can always kind of tell when a dragonfly has newly emerged. They tend to be very pale, and their wings are very, very opalescent, pearlescent. They kind of shimmer almost like oil spills. And that coloration, that shimmering, goes away after about 20 minutes, okay, when the body hardens. So imagine that this whole adult body was stuck inside this nymph. So all the legs were inside those legs, all the wings were in there. And I've actually seen this many times that until there's a little connection here, this little thread, until that thread is snapped, I've actually seen a nymphal dragonfly head pivoting one direction while the adult dragonfly head is pivoting in a completely different direction. So for a very brief moment in time, it's almost like there's 2 animals in one body. It's the craziest thing. But they have a very short amount of time to pull all their legs and all their wings and all their antennae out of the body. And they're not hard at this point. They're actually incredibly, incredibly soft, which means that they can tear their bodies during this process. They can get stuck and break off legs. And remember, The adult stage is the last stage. They're not going to be shedding the adult skin and growing further after this. So any damage they do at this point, they got to live with, or they're not able to live with. So a couple of others. So this set of pictures here is actually the 2-hour picture that I got to witness right on the Connecticut River in Gill, Massachusetts. And I remember this guy distinctly because it was the first one I actually got to watch from start to finish. And the fact that it was 2 hours in the pouring rain. And I'll tell you what happened to this guy too. It actually did not have a good ending. But to give you some kind of idea, this one actually also was fun because I had not realized that the nymph would change so much in appearance just from emerging even before it got to eclosure. And you can kind of see that between this picture and the one on the right. But here's the nymph crawling out. And it kind of got to, this is a Spinoceps, a clubtail type. Got to a spot, I thought, okay, yeah, looks like it's happy. It looks like it'll get ready to emerge. And it sat there for a good 45 minutes and then decided it didn't like the sand. And it kept crawling up to this piece of driftwood, and that seemed to suit it a little bit better. And it was there for like another 20 minutes without doing anything. And then it started flexing its body, and this whole abdomen section extended like an accordion. So this is the same nymph between all these pictures, and it elongated, it changed colors, it had spots. I had never seen it before. And then we started seeing the adult come out. So again, this is a different, if I go back real quickly, remember this is different species that likes to eclose upside down. This one likes to eclose horizontally. They can see the adult body. Everything's all kind of wrapped very tightly together and has to pull and really kind of struggle to get itself out from the skin. And here's more of the same one. You can see that the thread kind of snapping, its wings starting to unfurl, a little bit more, and it creates this kind of green goo that from behind the head and from the tip of the abdomen, and it actually coats its body with this. I'm not quite sure what it is. I'd love to investigate it a little bit more. I don't know if it's a hardening agent or whatever it was, but it really spent a lot of time kind of coating its body and then unfurling all these wings, and you can kind of see that lovely opalescent on the wings of this newly emerged. It's called a teneral at this stage, so they just have kind of come out in the first like 10 minutes or so. And then typically what happens is they'll take a very short flight away from their emergence zone because they really don't want a predator to pick them off immediately. So let's take a very short hop away. It's generally not that far away. And then they'll perch somewhere, flutter their wings, and get the hemolymph inside their bodies to really get through all of their structure, harden up a little bit more, because until their body's hardened, they do run the risk of potentially tearing their wings off by flying too far. So this particular dragonfly, as I mentioned, was the 2-hour emerger. And I said didn't have the greatest end to a story because I spent all 2 hours watching this guy, and I was sitting there in the company of about 4 chipmunks that were sitting with me the whole 2 hours, watching all this on the riverbank. You can kind of see how the story's going to end. They waited until this dragonfly had emerged completely from the exuviae and was all nicely unfurled before 2 of the chipmunks sauntered down this piece of driftwood and proceeded to munch the dragonfly in front of my eyes. So this poor little one didn't make it any further than that piece of driftwood. It ended up in the gullet of the trunk. So some of my work has been looking at what happens to these dragonflies if we alter their habitat. So remember, they have to crawl out of the water in some way in order to get to their eclosure and emergence site. They're not able to fly up and over a barrier. So changes that we make to their habitats, particularly shoreline areas, can have a big impact on these different dragonflies. And like I mentioned earlier, it does seem like there are species specific behaviors, both in terms of the habitat they prefer to close in and their behavior during a closure. So how far they want to travel, both vertically and horizontally across that barrier zone. So some species did seem to have preferences for substrate. So they really only came out on very silty, like riverbanks or shorelines. And I have seen many, hundreds, come out on a shoreline that was maybe a little bit more sandy than silty and turn around and go back into the water body and not come back out again. And you can kind of tell when a nymph is about ready to close because they have a very hard time staying on the bottom surface of a riverbank or wherever they are, because there is an air pocket between the adult body and the nymphal body, and it essentially functions almost like a life preserver. So they're a lot more buoyant and they kind of float. So it was always a little bit sad because you'd see these nymphs come out and for whatever reason decided that wasn't the place they wanted to emerge. You see them go back in the water and you'd see them floating and you'd realize that they probably were going to be drowning. They'd made that decision. It just wasn't right for them. So some liked silty shorelines, some liked vegetation, some seemed to really enjoy poison ivy. Really love those species. Some like brambles, some like rocks. And every species was very, very different. So let's get back to what we do as humans to make life a little bit more challenging potentially for these dragonflies. So one thing that we do in a lot of our water systems is we alter the shorelines. We do this for a variety of reasons, and a lot of my research is on large rivers, namely the Connecticut River. And Connecticut River has issues with erosion along its shorelines, particularly from recreational boat traffic. A lot of my research was done in the Turner's Falls area of Connecticut River. That's kind of an impoundment area. And there's a lot of erosion. So one of the classic ways to kind of stabilize a riverbank is to throw a whole bunch of riprap along a shoreline. It helps. It definitely helps with erosion. But each one of these little rocks, think of it from a dragonfly nymph's perspective, these are mountains. So if you have a species that only, let's say, crawls 3 or 4 meters, so like 9 to 12 feet from a water to their emergence site, or one even that only goes a meter, so 3 feet, that distance on a flat sandy beach would be 3 meters away from the water. On a shoreline that has all these rocks, these nymphs are going to have to crawl up and over and down, and over and down, up and over and down each one of these rocks. So that 3-foot travel distance from the water might actually result in them only being a couple inches, depending upon the size of the rock. So 2 of the species I looked at in particular, because they were the most commonly found, were clubtail, so arrow clubtail and cobra clubtail. One is a lazy one, I called it. The Spinoceps, the arrow club, it doesn't really like to travel that far from the water. And the other one, the cobra, is a little bit further. So I did find in riverbanks that had these kind of rock stabilizations, the riprap, it affected both species. So they crawled a lot less of a distance. So they were closer to the water line. And you're probably thinking, well, what does that matter? Well, in this particular stretch, the Connecticut River, we do have issues with hydroelectric facilities, so the water level changes pretty rapidly. We also have recreational boat wakes. So if you're only crawling a couple inches to a foot from the water line, there's a great likelihood that the nymph is going to get whacked by a boat wake or, by water level rise, and it will drown. And I saw a number of the spinoceps where you'd find their exuviae where their little abdomen was almost bent in a 90-degree angle straight. And that was because their little tail end was getting whacked by water. And so they tried to kind of bend their tail. And this can be an issue if you have, species of concern or threatened, that our shorelines are altering. I also looked at a lot of other different things and how that affected how far these species traveled. So here's our arrow club tail. I looked at things like what was the sediment like? Was it silty? Was it sandy? Again, the size of the rock, how wide that riprap zone was. And then also looked at temperature, because of course temperature is a big determinant for species that are temperature controlled. So everything on this graph, everything that's to the right of 0, so the positive end, that resulted in an increase in how far the species traveled from the water. And everything to the left are characteristics that resulted in a decrease. And you might wonder what this downriver, upriver is. Again, this particular section of the river is influenced by hydroelectric. So they pull water out of the Connecticut River up to the top of North Mount Herman area, and then they release the water when they want to generate electricity. So where you are really does kind of matter. So all these variables to the right, these are actually good things because that increases the distance the species is getting away from the water, away from those potential wake and water level rise. And then, of course, everything to the left are problematic. And then for our other species, let's get through that. Our cobra cubtail, okay, remember these guys are a little bit more difficult. Same deal, everything to the right are variables that would result in an increase in distance traveled, and everything to the left were variables that resulted in a decrease in travel distance. You can see a lot more things on this particular species that really seem to result in changes to travel distance. So what can we do? Well, there are a lot of other methods of bank stabilization, not using rocks, changing the size of the rocks, varying it up a bit so you don't have such long stretches that are rock stabilized. Maybe break it up between biocore stabilization and then a section of rocks and something else, just so it's not like this massive barrier to these emergent types of species. One of the other projects I am involved in that's actually a lot of fun, and the only entomologist right now in Connecticut involved in this project, is the Dragonfly Mercury Project, DMP. And this is a project run by USGS and the National Park Service. It essentially happens in, I believe, almost every national park or historic site or area in US and US territories. In Connecticut, we only have one currently recognized National Historic Site, which is in Weir Farm, down in Wilton, Connecticut. So usually in the early fall, I will go down to the site. I usually drag along my class of students, so willingly or not, and anybody else that wants to join me is more than welcome. And we spend the day collecting nymphs from the Weir Pond. We'll go out with nets and we try to gather as many nymphs as we can that are big enough for the project. And the whole purpose behind this is that because these nymphs, again, are sitting in the water for several years, they're really great bioindicators, so living indicators of environmental changes. And in the case of this particular project, it's focused on mercury deposition. So mercury fallout. And mercury obviously is mostly coming from industrial combustion, gets carried on the air currents, and then falls back down to the ground either as dry particulate matter or through rain or snow or through fog. And then it runs off across the landscape and gets pulled in through a lot of different things. So plants will also pull it in. But once it washes off down into waterways, you get this possibility of, biomagnification. So the littlest tiny plankton and diatoms are pulling in mercury, and then their predators eat them, and they eat a lot of them. So the mercury levels go a little bit higher, and then the fish start getting involved. And of course, the concern is by the time that we step in and you're harvesting fish, the fish that we are potentially eating could have incredibly high mercury levels. So using something like dragonfly nymphs that are hanging out in the waterways for 3 to 5 years as our indicators allows us to kind of see like where are those fallout patterns. So like I said, we go down usually in the fall, and we'll collect the dragonfly nymphs, and we measure them and identify them. And then they get an all expense paid one-way trip to our operating lab, usually is in Oregon, I believe. And this is the hardest part for me because I personally kind of think dragonfly nymphs are kind of adorable. But for this project, they need to be incinerated. And then the mercury levels are tracked. And there's been a lot of data. This project's been going on for quite some time. You can, Google Dragonfly Mercury Project online. There's a lot of really great videos and information about it. And it's been around for such a long time, they've been able to really track not only where are the hot spots. So obviously, the bigger your waterway is, the surrounding area, the greater likelihood that the mercury levels in the dragonfly larvae is going to be higher than smaller. So Weir Farm, the pond is a man-made pond. It's not very big. So, the mercury levels are probably on the smaller side compared to like if we were sampling from, say, the Connecticut River. And then you can go on the Dragonfly Mercury Project website, and I just pulled this a couple of days ago, I believe, from the Insight, and it gives you this idea of what's called an impairment index. So essentially, it's a generated map that takes all of this data, all of these nymphal data collections from all the park areas that they're kind of being currently surveyed, and then based on that relative level of mercury found, and then compared to what potential impacts could be, it gives you this impairment index. So the relatively good news for Weir is, again, because it's a smaller waterway, it's not on a high impairment level, but it's a teeny tiny little data point. And we do have some high impairment and severe impairment areas in New England based on this. So I keep hoping that Coal Armory would get fully identified so then I can sample from the Connecticut River and kind of see where we are from that. But to give you an idea of how important dragonflies are to both the scientific community, for environmental health, and also just because they're amazing organisms. So hopefully this has been of interest. Like I said, I love to talk about dragonflies, so hopefully I didn't bore too many of you. But at this point, I would be happy to open it up for any questions that anyone has.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. That was fantastic. Yeah, we'll open it up the Q&A if anyone has any questions that they'd like to go ahead and put into the chat. We can get those rolling. Okay, here we go. And they are coming in fast and furious. Hold on one second. All right, our first question is from Laura Rancourt. Do they migrate at all?
Oh, yes, forgot to mention that. That was another project I was involved with a couple of years ago. Yeah, actually, NASA was doing a really awesome project for several years, looking at the common green darner, Enax junius, which is one that most people are familiar with. It's our big, bright blue and green, gorgeous dragonfly that we see flying around. And NASA got involved because those actually migrate globally and large masses that they could see by satellite, which is pretty awesome. So yes, some do migrate, some don't. But real honesty, there's if people are looking for a career change, or you have students that are interested in science and wondering what the heck to do, get them to become an entomologist that's an ornithologist, because there just isn't a lot of work being done. I'm one of only a few. Um, Pretty much in the US, it's much more common to have studies done in Europe and Asia, because this kind of sidebar, but um, there's a lot of interesting lore around dragonflies. So in Eastern cultures, they're considered to be messengers from our ancestors and harbingers of good luck. Western cultures, they're considered to be evil. The common names reflect that. So in Western cultures, we have things like devil's darning needle, and all these kind of horrible things, and people thinking they're going to sew your eyes shut and your ears shut and they're going to sting you. And we don't see that in Eastern. And it's kind of interesting that the research world is follows that. So there's very few in Western, and there's all the dragonfly research is being done in Eastern. Just sidebar. But yes, it does, but there's so much more that needs to be tracked.
Excellent. Okay. The next question was from Jeffrey Atwood. Could we just cover the natural predators for dragonflies?
Anything that likes a tasty snack. So in terms of what I've seen eat them, I guess I'd have to ask, like, do you mean the nymph, or do you mean the adults, or across the board? For adults, birds, birds are big. Snakes, turtles, mammals, evil chipmunks, all those kind of things. In the nymph, like the larval stage, fish, frogs, each other. And I would have to say each other too as an adult. I mean, they're lovely little vicious munchers. Or if you've ever had a chance, like go on YouTube and Google like larvae dragonfly eating, it's the coolest darn thing. They're so designed for aquatic living. They have these mouth plates that fold over like a little snood, and then they use most of their mouth parts are bent underneath, and they have these prongs. Like I tell my students, it's like shish kebab. So they'll fling those out and impale whatever they want to eat. So little fish, each other. The ones in my lab love turkey bologna for some reason. So they'll impale that, and then it folds back, and then the snood folds over. So while they can munch their meal, and any little particles that fall out of the mouth fall into that little snood, and they don't lose anything in the
Oh,
water.
wow.
They're the politest eaters I've ever seen. They chew with their mouth closed. But basically, they'll eat anything, and anything will eat them. One reason why people do like them is that they love to eat mosquitoes. Mosquito larvae when they're babies, mosquitoes when they're adults. They love to eat black fly larvae. I mean, they're voracious. They'll just eat everything. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, those were actually the next two questions. Karen Moraes asked, how many mosquitoes does a dragonfly consume in a day? And then
I used to remember that trivia question. It's a lot. Yeah. to the point now where a friend actually got one of these. You go on Amazon, they're actually marketing now realistic dragonflies on pins that you can attach to your hat in an effort that supposedly mosquitoes will see this fake dragonfly and run screaming away from you and not eat you.
Camouflage. All right.
I don't know if they actually work, but apparently, there's a whole market on it. Yeah, but they're really wonderful for pest control. For eating all kinds of like aerial things. So if you have a lot of dragonflies hanging around you, like in the summertime, adult ones, don't be scared of them. It probably means you're less likely to get eaten by a mosquito or a black fly. Um,
That's good news, especially with all the diseases that mosquitoes carry.
yeah.
Donald Waite had a similar question. It was, what do adult dragonflies feed on? And I think you covered a good portion of that. But if you want to elaborate any more, feel free.
Yeah, I mean they're opportunistic eaters. They're definitely carnivores. I have yet to see one that likes munching on a salad. Um, they'll eat anything. There's one of my favorite ones. It's actually called the dragon hunter, which is a wild idea what they like to eat. Um, and they're the biggest nymph we have in New England. They're probably they can get to about 3.5 inches or so. They're
Oh, wow.
enormous. Only managed to find one. And the adults are huge and they fly really, really high up. And that's the other thing to kind of realize is every species exists in a different habitat. And just because you see a dragonfly like hanging around a waterway does not mean that the nymph of that species is in that waterway. So some of them will like once they emerge, they go 100 miles away and that's it. And then they'll come back and like lay eggs when they're ready to lay eggs, but they don't hang around. Some species, the males and females, don't hang around anywhere near each other. Um, Others of them, like in the summer evening, if when the adults are out, you'll see some that like will fly really low to the ground, where others are 40, 50 feet up on the top of the tree line. So they're very partitioned. Um, and they're also very habitat specific. So there are some that only kind of like forested streams with very dense vegetation. You only find the adults there. Some are shoreline. You won't find nymphs in saltwater, but you'll find like the adults like along the edge. I go to a BioBlitz event in Rhode Island each year, and depending upon where they have it, I already kind of know what different dragonflies there may or may or not see. They are what's called a moderate like bioindicator, not just for the mercury, but in general. So nymphs, they can exist in, I wouldn't say like the worst water conditions, but if you find like a dragonfly nymph, it's not like if you find like a mayfly nymph. If you find a mayfly nymph in the waterway, that really means your water is probably okay. Uh, they die out really fast. Dragonfly nymphs are a little bit hardier. So if you find them in a waterway, it doesn't mean that it's like pristine. It doesn't mean it's raw sewage. Um, if you don't find any dragonflies or any mayflies, you're only finding black fly larvae, then I would say get out of the water immediately. It's probably not real healthy. But they're kind of middle of the road. And then in terms of what the adults eat, and the nymphs, they're finicky. I didn't expect. I've been trying to keep them alive for years in my lab at St. Joe's, and some, like I said, like turkey bologna. Others only ate beef bologna. Some would only eat cut up earthworm. Some would not eat that. Some I had to wiggle it in front of them. Some would ignore it completely.
Hmm.
It's I don't know. They're frustrating little buggers, but they're really cute.
Imagine so. Um, Alana Sherman asked, how can land trusts help with conservation?
Well, the first thing that would be really great to do, and this is something that Keep Hoping Connecticut will do, because other states in New England have done like dragonfly atlases and done surveys, and we did one, but it's pretty old now. Um, Land trusts could like host a dragonfly bioblitz. And I'd be happy to come it out. I go everywhere. But like you could do that any time of the year. So you could do like a pond survey to see what's in your pond if you have a waterway. Um, like on your property, you could do like a adult survey in the summer. Bioblitzes are great ways to get your public involved. Get them to know the site, get them to kind of have a little bit more ownership for the site. And then that would be data because there just aren't enough people doing it. And as we all know, like Connecticut Deep, bless their souls, um, just aren't enough people, boots on the ground
Yeah.
to do any of this. So I kind of put a call out to like land trusts and people that are involved and garden clubs and anything like that. Certainly reach out to me if you want any help on how to run something like that. But I think a grassroots effort in Connecticut would be wonderful to get a little bit better idea of what is our situation. I have been seeing some changes. I've been studying this now for quite a while. With our climate changing, there's definitely been some shifting as to when things are emerging or not emerging. But we need a lot more eyes on the ground.
Okay. That was very helpful, and obviously, the land trust has your contact information, and folks can reach out, and hopefully we can work on that. Beverly Greenspan, I'm going to try not to butcher this. What is the impairment in the nymph's behavior produced by HG, and how do you measure it?
Oh my goodness. That is a wonderful question. I'd love to know. I honestly don't know if anyone has been even really looking at that enough. That would be a fun research project to do. I've been focusing a little bit more on pharmaceutical contamination in rivers than HG, but I mean, the fact that we're finding robust populations each year, again, I'm only looking at Weir Pond, which is pretty darn small, and there's only one species we ever find there, but it's not like we're having trouble finding the nymphs, so they're surviving. And I get the data back, the mercury levels aren't the highest. Again, small pond, small area. I would be interested in maybe talking to some of the researchers at the sites that are highly impaired, that are getting extremely high levels of mercury. I know for a few years, USGS and the Park Service was doing some mercury analysis of the water, and they were trying to get also sediment to see like the deposition, but budget and priorities have shifted. I don't know how much data there is with that. I would suggest reach out to the DMP folks
Okay.
for that question, because that's a really good one.
Okay. Jennifer Frank had a comment. She just commented that this is fascinating. I had no idea that their life cycles were mostly in the water. Eileen Roush has a question. Other than chipmunks, are birds their primary predators?
Yeah, and I used to like chipmunks. No. Yeah, actually, there's a lot of literature, and I read almost all on what was eating them, and birds seem to focus an awful lot. Snakes, on frogs were another big one. I would say in terms of what I have personally seen, and again, I tell people like my elevators pitch. Yeah, I know 20 minutes of a dragonfly's life. That's what my specialty is. The rest of it, no. But seeing what happens like during that emergence, other than the chipmunks, the big ones were birds. And that was after they had fully eclosed. And I think my most shocking memory was again that I told the story of it going to a riverbank on Connecticut River on Enfield one evening, and going at like dusk or dawn is the perfect time. It's when a lot of emergence seems to happen. And I saw like the 400 crawling out of the water. Literally, the ground was moving. It was like sci-fi horror movie, but I thought it was cool. And the whole beach was covered with these dragonflies coming out all at once and all emerging at once. And shimmering light in the sunset as everything took off and they tried to head over the river towards Windsor Locks on the other side. All of a sudden, you just heard whoosh of wings and then snapping. And all these birds came out of who knows where and and they just shimmering wings falling to the river. And like maybe 20 dragonflies made it to the other side. You're like, man, 5 years
Mother
of your
Nature is
life.
brutal.
It's just,
Absolutely
why they have
brutal.
so many offspring. Yeah,
Right?
no parental care. Don't get attached to your kids because they're not going to make it.
Oh goodness. Our next question is from an anonymous attendee. Do you have mercury level data for the Farmington River measured by Dragonfly testing?
I do not, because it's not a National Historic Site, so it's not part of the DMP project. So that project in particular is just focused on national parks, national forests, national historic sites. And like I said, currently Connecticut only has one officially recognized location at Weir Farm. For that person, they can reach out to Farmington River Watershed Association. I
Okay.
don't know if they're doing any mercury
Testing.
analysis of their waterways. I think they were focusing on other issues, particularly around Rainbow Reservoir, but can reach out to them. I'd be more than happy to go there. It's not cheap, this project. Right now the Park Service is kind of covering all the costs of like the testing, which I'm not doing. I'm just collecting, but they cover for some parks. Like we have to ship these nymphs using dry ice, which can only go out of Bradley. It's expensive to do, and you have all these protocols with it. So it's not cheap. So I doubt that a lot of places would kind of pick up on doing it on their own.
Okay. We're going to skip the next questions. We've gone over that. Paula Jones, for those that migrate, is light pollution a problem?
Yeah, I actually read some studies where people were looking at that. Again, not enough to have a whole lot of data, but the most interesting studies I did look at were the effects of light, reflected light on surfaces, mostly when it came to the egg laying. So it turns out that female dragonflies, are very attracted to like polarized light. They like shiny bling. And they're very much attracted to that kind of reflective light. So less going towards, like a light in a porch, we think like, other insects. But if there's, I know it's not quite light pollution, but if there's, say, a pile of broken glass right next to a riverbank, the dragonflies will choose that over the water because it's shinier reflected light, and they will go and they'll take their abdomens and try to lay eggs on the broken glass, and obviously they'll cut themselves. Polished granite headstones, same deal. Extremely attractive to dragonflies, so they'll go and they'll try to oviposit on a shiny granite headstone, again polarizing their abdomen and kind of kill. In terms of like the migrating, a couple of studies that I looked at, there was a little bit of magnetic control, like again the magnetic poles. So I don't know as much about like city lights or things like that attracting. I mean, you will find a lot of dragonflies like around your porch lights. It's less that they're attracted to light as they're attracted to the other insects that are attracted to light, and they'll just hang out and eat. But that's another good question. But it's kind of like one of the difficulties with dragonflies again is they're not a pest species. They're not a big agricultural importance other than controlling mosquitoes. So the funding for entomological research pretty much goes to, is it a disease-carrying vector that we need to kill? Is it something that eats our agricultural crops, or is it something that helps pollinate? And unfortunately, dragonflies don't fit any of that. So unless there's like a focus on just they're cool and awesome, or that they're a non-pesticide alternative for pest control, there really isn't a lot of funding.
Okay. Our next question is from Jeffrey Atwood. He asks if they're subject to diseases like funguses.
Again, I don't know if an awful lot's been looked into for that. I do know they do get parasitized a lot, like the ones I have in my lab. I've been having a keeping them alive, and there has been a lot of like fungal growth. We're thinking from the water, and they'll just it literally clogs them, and they suffocate, and that's it for the nymphs. And I've seen like a nymphs in the wild, less the fungal, but I'm sure they're carrying everything. But I've seen a lot of parasitized where there are other insects that are eating. Um, I've actually seen several cases where I'm surprised the nymph was still alive because half of it was gone, and there's this larvae of something else, a beetle larvae, like literally living in its abdomen, munching, and the nymph is still alive. And it's just kind of odd. So I'm sure there's stuff out there. I don't know as much. I mean, I know that like pesticides, things like that, are a big concern. Or there's not a lot of protection for any insects. I mean, their skeleton being on the outside, anything that dissolves through that cuticle layer is going straight into their system and kills them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty easy to kill or alter.
Okay. Here, just a few more. Karen Morass, when the dragonfly lands on water, what is it actually doing?
Yeah, so for most of the ones that you see, I'm assuming like the adults, when you see them like on the water, they're doing one of two things. They do need to drink. So a lot of times they'll skim over the surface and they're actually scooping up some water to drink. They could be hunting as well, or obviously they're ovipositing. So the female coming along and dropping eggs, and that's another kind of branch of not a lot of people studying. But some lay a single egg each time, so billions of eggs. Some lay a huge string. Some will lay them in vegetation, on top of vegetation. Yeah.
Our next one is from Frank Havlin. When I was a kid in Boston, convenient knowledge was that dragonflies could sew your lips together, so we avoided them.
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, I had a funny story if you have time, but I did my research on the Connecticut River, and I did for many summers, and there was this one older couple that like had a summer home there, sweet, sweet couple. And they'd be going up and down in their pontoon boat. They saw me out there, by myself, younger woman. They were convinced that I was in mortal danger because I was researching these dangerous animals known as dragonflies. So the first summer they saw me, they offered me safety goggles and ear muffs so that my eyes would be protected and would not be sewn shut, and my ears would not be drilled into and have like eggs laid in them. I was like, okay, I have to do some education. Next summer, they come by. They were thrilled to see me there because they thought I definitely would have been killed the first year for dealing with these dangerous animals. So the second year, they offered me a flare gun. How they got one, I don't know. I mean, these were like in their 70s, sweet older couple. And I'm like thinking, was this the fire off? Like warning shot. I'm like, yeah, I don't need it. And mace. I'm like, no, thank you. Third year, again, thrilled that I was still alive. They offered me a rifle. And I'm going, first off, if I was that good of a shot to hit a dragonfly with a rifle, and somehow they found like this Hannibal Lecter mask thing. I don't quite know what. It had like metal grills because they were convinced again it was going to sew my mouth shut. It's like, no, no, no. And it's really bad because that was like the last year of the grant funding.
Mhm.
So I didn't come
You
back the next
didn't go
year. So I'm sure they're like perusing the obituaries for like,
there's a couple convinced somewhere.
yeah,
Oh,
no,
that's great.
I still hear that all the time.
Mhm.
All the time. I actually hear from other entomologists sometimes that don't study dragonflies. It's like, no, yeah, no, there's no, and my students, I taught entomology this fall. I'm like, there's no stinger. They can't sting you. Yes, yes, they can bite. I have been bitten many a time, and the
Mhm.
bigger ones will hurt. But I'm like, anything will bite you if it gets handled.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're not going to sew you shut. They're not going to lay eggs or anything.
goodness. All right. Last couple. Jennifer Frank, are streams as good for nymphs as ponds?
Yeah, yeah, and actually, most of my work's been in, except for weirs, been streams and rivers. So any kind of flowing water, as long as there's water at least for part of the year, like even if they're in a pool, so they'll be in there for that part of the year. You'll find a nymph. Obviously, like mentioned, if it's shallow and it has the possibility to freeze all the way to the bottom, um, the nymphs might go elsewhere. They can exist out of water for a little bit, or they might go into the sediment, or they might go under leaves. Um, but if you have like a stream or a brook or something that has some moving water, we can go down there right now and find them.
Oh, perfect. Um, Lorenzo Jones, I joined late. Sorry if this has already been asked or not germane, but is there a way that a private landowner can contribute to this project or some phase of the work?
Yeah, not for the Dragonfly Mercury Project, like I said, because that's federal. But
Mhm.
certainly, if you've ever used like the app like Seek by iNaturalist, it's a really great. It's a free app. That would be awesome to like if you see a dragonfly, take a picture of it and post it. Because I and my students will often like peruse like iNaturalist world and kind of see
Mhm.
like what people are saying is in Connecticut as a way of kind of knowing. And then, certainly if you're a private landowner, you can look to see like where's your local um, land trust or land conservancy and kind of see what you have. And if you have something really interesting, it might be a protected species or status that would really help.
Excellent. And this is our last question, and it's more of a comment. It's from Karen Moraes again. Fascinating and so informative. Thank you.
Good to
Um,
hear.
and with that ends the queue questions that we have for this evening. I want to thank Dr. Martin and I want to thank Yvonne for hosting the event and Dr. Martin for presenting. Thank you everybody for attending. We have another webinar coming up on Wednesday, February 4th at 6:30, and that's going to be on horticulture, the abundant life in old and dead trees. So we will be back here a month from today. So again, just want to thank Dr. Martin and Yvonne. Anything you want to say on the way out?
I just want to mention that there are more events listed on the TRL Land Conservancy, I'm sorry, trlandconservancy.org website. Please check it out. There are hikes and obviously these events, you can RSVP for them.
And a
Thank
lot
you.
of these, sorry, Yvonne. A lot of these webinars are posted on the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy YouTube page. So if you'd like to check out some things that we've done in the past, you can check them out there. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Thank you.